Jason was known as the Golden Man of the town. Young, determined, and the owner of a large company, he had built an empire practically from nothing. His routine was intense, and everyone around him admired his ability to turn hard work into success. But what few knew was that behind all that shine, there was a shadow of insecurity that Jason struggled to hide. And although no one could imagine it, the moment when he would lose everything was closer than it seemed. This unexpected turn in Jason's life would forever change his perspective on what it truly means to be successful. Each day, Jason sank deeper under the pressure of keeping his empire afloat. The clock seemed to be his biggest enemy, as 24 hours in a day were never enough to handle all the demands. He knew something felt off, a sense that the control he had over his life was slipping through his fingers. He had built a solid career, but he was beginning to realize that no amount of effort in the world could stop the inevitable. What Jason didn't yet know was that the true turning point in his life wouldn't come from a new business opportunity, but from an unexpected encounter that would change everything. The people around him saw Jason as an unshakable force. To the town, he was the living example of success, someone who had achieved what many considered impossible. But inside, Jason was on the brink of collapse. Deep down, he knew that something big was about to happen, and despite all his efforts, he felt the ground was about to give way beneath his feet. The life he had fought so hard to build was on the verge of crumbling, and what came next would force him to question everything he thought he knew about himself and the true meaning of wealth. Amid the growing pressure, Jason barely had time for his own life. His nights were long, filled with worries, and his mornings were a race against the clock. Each new day felt like a fresh battle, and the weight of his responsibilities seemed to grow exponentially. He couldn't even remember the last time he had felt peace or genuine joy. Deep down, Jason knew something was wrong, but he just couldn't stop chasing after a success that felt emptier by the day. Few could have imagined it, but his life was about to take a completely unexpected turn, and this change would be more transformative than any material achievement he had ever attained. And then, on an otherwise ordinary morning, Jason experienced the beginning of something that would completely change his life. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to lose everything. The fortune he had worked so hard to accumulate would disappear. But surprisingly, this wouldn't be the end of his story. On the contrary, it would mark the start of an even deeper journey. A journey of personal discovery that would prove the real wealth wasn't in material things, but in something far more valuable. This is the story of how losing everything led Jason to find what he truly needed. Time was no longer an ally for Jason. As the days passed, chaos took over his company. Decisions that once seemed safe and well thought out began to unravel into disasters. Major contracts were cancelled, and investors started losing confidence. Everything he had built with such effort seemed to crumble right before his eyes. What was once stability and prosperity had now become a cycle of layoffs, debts, and uncertainty. Jason desperately tried to salvage what was left of his company, but the circumstances seemed increasingly out of his control. Amid the collapse of his empire, Jason found himself growing more and more isolated. He had distanced himself from friends and family, and the people who once admired him now avoided him. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, and he found himself trapped in a spiral of negative thoughts. Doubts about his abilities began to dominate his mind. Did I fail as a leader? Where did I go wrong? He asked himself repeatedly. The weight of responsibility for so many people, employees, partners, and even his own family, made each failure even more painful. What was once pride and confidence had now been replaced with fear and guilt. The pressure soon took a toll on his health. Jason, who had always taken pride in his physical resilience, began to feel his body breaking down. Sleepless nights became a constant, as insomnia consumed him. The accumulated tension caused intense physical pain, which seemed to worsen with each passing day. But what hurt the most wasn't the physical pain. It was the emotional toll. Jason could no longer see a way out. The mind that once solved problems with speed and clarity was now clouded by anxiety and confusion. He felt as though he was slowly losing control, not just of his company, but of his entire life. At home, the situation wasn't any better. His personal life, already impacted by the stress of work, began to crumble alongside his career. Conversations with his wife grew more distant, and moments with his children, which once brought him peace, now felt like another source of frustration. Jason felt as though he had failed not only as a businessman but as a father and husband. The shadow of failure followed him wherever he went, and the hope he once had for the future was quickly fading. He had hit rock bottom, and at that moment, it seemed like there was no way out in sight. On a cloudy afternoon, Jason, lost and consumed by despair, decided to leave the house. He didn't know where he was going, but something inside him pushed him away from the walls that now felt suffocating. He walked through the streets of the town that once celebrated his success. The shops, the cafes, and the buildings he used to frequent no longer had the same shine. His expensive clothes couldn't hide the emptiness he felt inside. With slumped shoulders and his head down, Jason wandered aimlessly, as if searching for something he couldn't even name. The feeling of loss was overwhelming, and he wondered if he would ever feel peace again. As he crossed through a park, he noticed a man sitting on a bench. The man was simple, dressed in worn clothes, but with a serene expression. As Jason walked past him, he felt the stranger looking deeply in his direction. Without understanding why, he stopped. "You seem to be carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders," said the man, breaking the silence. Surprised, Jason sat down beside him without a second thought. The man continued, "What you've lost isn't the end. Sometimes, losing everything is the first step toward finding something much greater." These words, spoken so calmly and confidently, hit Jason like a storm. Jason remained silent, but inside, his emotions were boiling over. What did this man know about his life? How could he possibly understand his pain, his anguish? Yet somehow, those simple words had pierced his heart in a way no conversation had before. He felt as if the stranger could see something in him that he couldn't see himself. The man, unhurried, looked out at the horizon and added, "Sometimes, what we think we need is exactly what's keeping us from finding what we truly want." Jason began to reflect on this. For the first time in a long while, he questioned whether the solution to his life wasn't in getting back everything he had lost, but in accepting that something greater was waiting for him. The walk that had begun aimlessly now had new meaning. Jason stood up, said goodbye to the man, and continued his journey. But this time, the weight on his chest felt different, not from despair, but from reflection. He realized he had been holding on so tightly to the fear of losing that he hadn't allowed himself to understand what truly mattered. That afternoon, the man's words echoed in his mind, "Losing is the first step to finding something greater." Jason still didn't know what he would discover along the way, but a new spark of hope had been lit. Perhaps the real transformation was just beginning. Jason's transformation wasn't immediate. In the days following that encounter in the park, he still faced the same problems that had been haunting him: the debts, the loss of his company, and the uncertainty of his future. But this time, he approached these challenges with a different mindset. The anxiety that once consumed him gave way to a calm acceptance that some things were simply no longer within his control. He began to realize that success wasn't just about what he had achieved materially, but about how he handled adversity. This shift in perspective was the first step in his recovery. Little by little, Jason began to rebuild his life, but in a way that was completely different from what he had ever imagined. Instead of focusing on accumulating wealth and power, he started to appreciate the small victories of everyday life. He found a modest job that supported him, and for the first time in years, he learned to value the simplicity of life. His new routine, which he once would have despised, brought him a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. Jason also began helping others who were going through similar crises, offering support and listening to their stories. This not only fulfilled him, but also gave him a new sense of purpose. His health, which had suffered so much during the peak of his crisis, also began to improve. The insomnia faded, and the pains that had tormented him started to disappear. Jason realized that by letting go of the burden of material success, he had begun to heal not just his mind, but also his body. He was no longer racing against time or chasing unattainable goals. Instead, he focused on becoming a better person, more balanced and connected to what truly mattered. The inner peace he had longed for was now within his reach, and it transformed his life from the inside out. Looking back, Jason understood that the loss of his empire had been the catalyst for a new phase in his life, a phase in which he had found something far more valuable than money or status. He discovered that true wealth lay in human connections, in the ability to reinvent oneself, and in the strength to believe that, even in the midst of chaos, there is always a way forward. The experience of losing everything taught him that a person's worth isn't in what they possess, but in who they become. And with that, Jason learned to live a full, simple, and above all, meaningful life. Jason's story is a powerful reminder that life, with its unexpected twists, often challenges us in ways we can't predict. He was forced to face what many fear: complete loss. But, as we saw, that loss was the beginning of a new journey. At first, it seemed like the end of everything he knew, but by letting go of the fear of not reclaiming what he had lost, he discovered that true value wasn't in his possessions, but in the lessons life brought him. Just like Jason, we can all be confronted by changes that shake us, but it is in those moments that the greatest transformations take place. What Jason teaches us is that, more often than not, what we see as an irreparable fall is, in fact, an opportunity in disguise. When we lose what we thought was essential, we are forced to look inward and understand what truly matters. In Jason's case, he learned that success isn't measured by a bank account or accumulated material wealth, but by personal growth, the ability to rise after every defeat, and the understanding that there is much greater value in living according to principles of simplicity and gratitude. The central message of Jason's journey is clear. True strength doesn't lie in controlling everything but in knowing how to handle what we can't control. Perseverance, even when everything seems lost, is what allows us to discover new possibilities and grow through challenges. When Jason finally stopped fighting against the current and accepted that not all losses need to be defeats, he began living a life richer than he had ever imagined. He discovered that true wealth was in human connections, in the love he shared, and in the peace he found by redefining what success meant to him. If you're facing a moment of difficulty, remember that, like Jason, the answers you seek may not be in what you're trying to regain, but in what you need to learn as you move forward. Sometimes, it's necessary to lose everything to find something much greater. Trust the process, persist through adversity, and like Jason, you may discover that life has a special way of guiding you toward what truly matters. Persisting, even when the path seems impossible, is the key to uncovering a new way of living. One full of meaning, purpose, and true wealth. If Jason's story touched your heart, remember, even in the darkest moments, there is always a light waiting to be found. No matter how tough your journey may be, true strength lies in persisting and believing that something greater is waiting for you. Don't give up. Share this message with someone who needs hope and inspire them to keep fighting. Their turning point may be closer than they think. Together, we can turn challenges into opportunities.